Due to the graphic nature of this program, viewer discretion is advised.
In an interview on death row 4 days before his execution, convicted murderer John Evans describes the attitudes that led to his involvement in criminal activities. The intent of the analysis and its dramatization is to warn juveniles of the possible consequences of certain thought and behavior patterns and to discourage them from taking the first steps toward crime. The portrayal of Evans' criminal career extends from his first experience with shoplifting in June 1963 to his murder of a pawnshop owner during a robbery in January 1977. Evans was the oldest son in a large, loving, well-situated middle-class family with traditional values. Evans answers the question of how a child from a nurturing, supportive environment could go wrong in his comments on each stage. His initial involvement in petty theft was the result of succumbing to peer pressure. He took the dare of wild friends already engaging in minor offenses. Shoplifting and joyriding escalated to armed robbery. His family's angry, bewildered reactions to his inexplicable behavior only antagonized him further. Bored with school, he dropped out despite his parents' efforts to help. In his own words, he threw away his childhood. When his family reached the breaking point after his repeated arrests and refused him aid, placing responsibility on him for his own behavior, he set out to show his family and fell in with a criminal companion in search of notoriety. Throughout his criminal career, he was self-centered, arrogant, and convinced that he was too smart to get caught. In seeking attention or lashing out in anger, he did not consider the consequences of what he was doing. Not until he had taken a life did he realize the destructive implications of his own behavior for others. It was this insight that ultimately prompted him to make a public statement to juveniles shortly before his execution. Not only does the film address the critical issue of psychological causes of crime, but through its portrayal of the penitent attitude and social concern of the subject, it raises questions about the suitability of the death penalty in such cases.
Excruciating end: death row killer slowly fried to death in horror 14-minute execution on Yellow Mama electric chair. Was one of the most grisly botched executions in history. A death row killer who slowly fried to death in a horror 14-minute electrocution after it took 3 jolts to kill him. John Lewis Evans III was put to death on Alabama's infamous Yellow Mama electric chair in 1983. Eyewitnesses described the stench of burning flesh as nauseating. The drifter had killed pawnbroker Edward Nassaney in Mobile in January 1977 and confessed to a string of crimes including robberies, kidnapping and extortion. Prosecutors are said to have rejected his guilty plea. They wanted to secure an execution through a conviction from a jury, the Daily Star reports. And, after Evans is said to have shown no remorse for his actions, the death penalty was confirmed. Eyewitness Russell F. Kanan wrote in Burning at the Wire, "The execution of John Evans, his body slammed against the straps holding him in the electric chair and his fist clenched permanently. The electrode apparently burst from the strap holding it in place. A large puff of grayish smoke and sparks poured out from under the hood that covered Mr. Evans's face. An overpowering stench of burnt flesh and clothing began pervading the witness room. More smoke emanated from his leg and head. Again, the doctors examined Mr. Evans. The doctors reported that his heart was still beating and that he was still alive. At 8:44, the doctors pronounced him dead. The execution of John Evans took 14 minutes. 6 years after Evans' death, it took 2 attempts to execute Horace Franklin Duncans Jr. in the same state. The first attempt failed because of a misconnected cable. Duncans Jr., 28, died in 1989 after being convicted of murdering Mama Forlyn McCurry. He was declared dead 19 minutes after the executioner first flipped the voltage switch. His attorney, Steve Ellis, described the scene as grisly. The U.S. government conducted its first federal execution in 17 years in July last year. The American Civil Liberties Union called it a truly dark period for our country. And it was reported last month that Arizona is preparing to execute death row inmates using hydrogen cyanide. The state's gas chamber is said to have undergone a refurbishment, with Corrections Department chiefs spending thousands on ingredients to make the deadly gas. Hydrogen cyanide is the same lethal gas used by the Nazis at Auschwitz. Documents obtained by The Guardian reveal a solid brick of potassium cyanide was bought in December for $1,530, on top of the more than $2,000 spent on acquiring materials. Sodium hydroxide pellets and sulfuric acid, used to create the lethal gas, were also purchased. And the state's gas chamber in the Arizona State Prison Complex, Florence, which was built back in 1949 and has stood unused for more than 2 decades, has been refurbished, according to the department. Republican-run Arizona has been pushing in recent months for its execution system to be restarted. It was suspended for 7 years when a botched injection in 2014 saw inmate Joseph Woods take almost 2 hours to die after 14 doses of a mix of drugs that were not widely used at the time were pumped into his body. Arizona has not used lethal gassing as a way of execution since 1999, when Walter Legrand was subjected to the method. The German national was sentenced to death for an armed robbery in 1982, in which a man was killed. According to an eyewitness account of his execution, he appeared to experience agonizing choking and gagging, taking 18 minutes to die. In November last year it was reported a death row killer winced, twitched and gasped for breath in his final moments after being given a lethal injection last night. Orlando Hall, 49, was executed for kidnapping, gang raping a 16-year-old girl, dousing her in gas and burying her alive 26 years ago. And in August it was reported a child killer who raped and dismembered a girl with a chainsaw suffered an excruciating death when he was executed. Wesley Ira Perky was put to death by an injection of pentobarbital in Terre Federal Penitentiary, Indiana. An autopsy performed on Perky revealed he suffered severe bilateral acute pulmonary edema and frothy pulmonary edema in the trachea and mainstem bronchi, according to new documents lodged by lawyers representing death row inmate Keith Nelson, who is scheduled to be executed on Friday. Those findings mean fluid quickly filled Perky's lungs and entered his airway up to his trachea, causing a near-drowning sensation and extreme pain, terror and panic, said Gail Van Norman, a medical expert retained by Nelson's lawyers to interpret the autopsy. Witness to an execution. Atmore, Ayla. 10 hours before being led into a small room to witness the execution of John Lewis Evans III, I learned my wife was pregnant with our first child, and in that brief span of time my notions of life and death became something abruptly personal, beautifully and horribly. There is still a nagging regret that my joy over the impending birth was blurred by the chilling sight of Evan's chest rhythmically rising and falling after what was supposed to be an instantaneously lethal dose of electricity. And now, a week after the fact, questions linger about whether Evans still felt anything after that first bolt of electricity ripped into his shaved skull. 3 reporters and the 2 witnesses Evans asked to attend his execution were searched at Holman prison on April 22nd and then ushered through a raging thunderstorm to a back door. After a short walk along a hall lined by prison guards, we were in the observation room. Beyond a window was Evans, strapped around his legs, chest, arms and abdomen to the bright yellow electric chair. The leather straps pulled his shoulders back into an awkward and uncomfortable final position. Eagle-eyed. That's how he looked, with shaved head and sharp, handsome nose and chin. But Evan's face was pure calm. His pale blue eyes stared straight ahead, blinking occasionally. He had said he was prepared to die. If that wasn't true, his face didn't betray him. Inside the red brick death chamber with Evans, attired in a white button-up prison smock and white socks, were Holman Warden J.D. White and 2 uniformed guards. White, standing directly in front of Evans, read the death warrant. That was supposed to take 3 minutes, but it seemed much shorter, perhaps because I was intent on committing the scene to memory. No paper or pen was allowed the media witnesses. Evans, 33, a drifter from Beaumont, Texas, convicted of killing a mobile pawnbroker, had asked that his final statement remain private. But when the warrant was read, and it was Evans' turn to speak, prison chaplain Martin Weber, one of 9 men in the small observation room, began to quote the condemned man's last words. He's saying, "I have no malice for anyone, no hatred for anyone." Weber, apparently knowing what Evans intended to say, whispered to the witnesses. Prison Commissioner Fred Smith turned and shook finger, as if scolding a child, and Weber fell silent. One of Evans' final wishes had been violated. Evans' words weren't audible to the spectators, but he delivered them in rushed sentences, and even smiled once before the guards attached the electrode-filled skull cap to his head. Evans' head was made snug to the chair with a chin strap and black belt across the forehead. His causal expression disappeared behind a black veil. Smith opened a telephone line to Gov. George Wallace in Montgomery. I folded my arms across my chest and told myself I was ready. A man I love and respect had witnessed an electrocution as a young reporter. He had given me a novelist's description of an electric chair execution, along with the warning, "It'll be loud and it will stink." At the instant White pulled the switch and sent 1,900 volts burning into Evans, who clenched his fists and arched his body rigidly into the restraining straps. The folly of being prepared was gone. A moment later, as spark and flame crackled around Evans' head and shaved, razor-nicked left leg, white smoke seeped from beneath the veil and curled from his head and leg. Midway through the surge of electricity, his body quivered and then fell back into the chair as the current ended. We thought that was it. Bad enough, but expected unbearable. 2 doctors filed out the witness room to examine the body and pronounce Evans dead. The prison doctor, dressed in a blue surgical costume and tan loafers with tassels, placed a stethoscope to the smoke, turned and nodded, the natural signal for yes, he's dead. But the nod meant he had found a heartbeat. The other doctor confirmed the gruesome discovery. They and the warden walked from the death chamber, and a guard reattached the power lines to the chair and the electrode that fell away when a leg strap burned through. Evans' chest rose against the straps the first time. It rose evenly once, twice, maybe again. A stream of saliva ran down the front of the white prison smock. God, he's trying to signal them, I thought. I had been told a body might continue to jerk after taking a massive electric charge. I strained to figure out if this was convulsive movement in Evans' strap-crossed chest, and concluded absolutely not. This was too measured. Just slow, deep breathing. Turning to another witness, I said, "He survived." He nodded. Behind us, Russell Kanan, the lawyer who 90 minutes earlier lost a battle to win Evans a reprieve, stared resolutely ahead. Spark and flame again accompanied the onset of the second charge. But this time, for a grim second, the veil slipped a fraction of an inch on the left side, giving the impression it was burning though and would fall away, exposing the face I'd noted was handsome minutes earlier. Almost in unison a kind of shuddering grunt came from the witnesses, but the mask stayed in place. When the second charge subsided, the doctors re-examined Evans, and again it was clear they found a pulsating heart. Smith knocked on the viewing room window for a clue to Evans' state. Deputy Warden Ron Jones turned and shook his head. From the back of the room, Kanan suddenly, urgently blurted, "Commissioner, I asked for clemency. This cruel and unusual punishment." Smith, his back to Kanan, did not respond or even indicate he had heard the plea, which Kanan repeated, begging that the request be relayed to Wallace. The commissioner then conveyed the appeal for clemency, but before a reply came from the governor's office in Montgomery, the third charge was administered. Again, Evans' head and legs smoldered. His fists, which clenched with the first jolt, remained locked on the chair's arms. The doctors went back for the third time, and Kanan begged for clemency in case they have to do it again. Smith, eyes welling, communicated the message. His voice broke. I thought Kanan had snapped. Surely he didn't want Evans unstrapped at this point. I was convinced things were out of hand and was not sure the chair, for whatever reason, was capable of killing Evans. But surely the only thing worse than proceeding was stopping. I seriously thought they would have to bring in a gun and shoot Evans in the chair. Smith signaled White out of the death chamber as the doctors again listened for a heartbeat. The warden cracked the door to the witness room and heard Smith order, "Hold everything. They are asking for clemency." Moments later, with things spiraling faster out of control, word came back from Wallace. "The governor will not interfere." "Proceed," Smith said. Almost simultaneously, a witness to my right said, "He's dead." Cold as it sounds, it was welcome news. Evans' ordeal was over. And for the time being, so was the ordeal, however great or small, of those picked to watch him die.